Welcome to the Gift of Addiction. Today I am sitting with the man who taught me to meditate and pretty much half of Sydney to meditate. He's a bit of a guru and he's going to explain what guru actually means. But Tim Brown, I'm sitting with Mr. Tim Brown, and thanks for coming on the Gift of Addiction.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Bertie, anytime.
And Tim, you taught me to meditate about a year ago, just over a year ago when I first came to you, and I was in early recovery from addiction.
Yes.
So I'm now approaching a year of sobriety.
Fantastic.
And I just want to say thank you at the beginning, because the technique of meditation that you've taught me has helped me enormously.
Yeah.
I don't know how much exactly you know about the links between all the benefits of meditation for people who are trying to recover from addiction issues.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work around that over the last 20 years,
But I'd like to talk about that, but also about you and how you came to be who you are.
Yes, yep.
Because it's not very common, in a city like Sydney, where somebody who, you were raised went to a Catholic school myself, and you've somewhere along your life you've sort of changed paths.
Yes.
And do you want to tell us how you got to where you are?
Yeah. So I was, a rugby playing, beer drinking agricultural economist before all this. And, I went to a big rugby school, loved my rugby, and then studied agricultural economics at Sydney University. I was a country boy originally from out near Wellington, out near Dubbo, but came to school here in Sydney and then went to university, and meditation was not on my radar at all, not vaguely interested and hadn't crossed my mind. But I finished university and ended up getting a job in Uzbekistan in the 90s, and growing cotton out in the former Soviet. And so moved out there and spent a couple of years out there. I was looking for an adventure after school and uni and got it. It was fascinating. But I ended up kind of second in charge of a £20 million project, age 21 in the former Soviet, so had to grow up pretty quickly and take on big loads of responsibility pretty quickly. But I learned to speak Russian and Uzbek on the ground, and it was amazing. It was just a great adventure. But it was actually when I got back from that and it was time to settle down, grow up, get a job. I was about 24, 25, and I was back in the corporate world and being pushed down the Myers-Briggs testing and personality testing funnel. Pressure was building. I wasn't handling it very well. Speaking of addiction, I was doing some pretty, naughty things. Not naughty things, but I was probably drinking too much and doing a few other things. Yep. Experimenting, trying to manage my stress load, and I was going kind of down that path fairly quickly, and not enjoying myself. I really wasn't feeling great, and I was very fortunate. I was at a family function one night, and an incredibly intuitive aunt of mine bailed me up at a family function, and she just kind of gently herded me into a corner. She looked at me, in the eyes and said, "How are you settling back in?" And I'd been living in a Muslim village on my own for a couple of years, pretty much, and I was happy to be back, but I was finding it incredibly challenging. And she said, I said, "Oh, actually, I'm happy to be home, but I'm finding it pretty tricky and difficult to settle back in." And she said, "I think you'd benefit enormously from learning to meditate." And I think I almost dropped both beers that I was holding. I think I was double parked at the time.
Sure.
and I was like, I was like, "What?" And she said, "We all learnt recently from this guy and have found it incredibly helpful. If you're ever interested, let me know and I'll put you in touch." And she just turned on her heels and walked away. And I thought that was one of the strangest conversations I've ever had. And I forgot about it for maybe 5-6 weeks. Back into the city, interviewing, pressure building, drinking too much, and various other things. And eventually I picked up the phone and I rang her and I said, "Look, I need to do something, and you mentioned this thing." And she said, "Well, I'll set you up with this guy. His name's Tom Knowles. He's based in Wallara. So why don't you go and see him for an hour? Go and have a chat, see what you think, and if you like it, great. If you don't, well, what have you lost?" So I remember turning up there to number 79 Jersey Road in 1998 And as I was expecting, the saffron robes and the incense billowing out the window, and this bloke answered the door in moleskins and a shirt. He looked pretty much like you do today, Bertie.
Right. Yep.
And I just assumed he was the secretary, and the big kahuna was upstairs levitating or something.
Okay. All right.
I knew nothing about meditation.
Yep.
And that was Tom, and he was a trained neuroscientist that had given up a career in neuroscience to teach meditation when he'd seen the benefits. He was an American guy, but he was a keen surfer in his youth. He'd learned to meditate and then travelled around the world with a guy called Mararishi Mahesh Yogi, who was the guy that taught the Beatles to meditate, and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and all those guys back in the 60s.
Yep.
And landed here in Australia, saw the surf, saw the great lifestyle here, and so set up a meditation centre here in the 70s. And I'd been here when I met him here for about 35 years. Had taught about 10,000 people to meditate. Was retained by the big law firms and the big banks and merchant banks in town for their top performing people. He was an impressive guy, and he was just a normal bloke. He was married, had kids, lived up here in Wallara, liked swimming at Bronte, and that's what really kind of got me interested. He was just again from my point of view, a relatively normal guy. And I met Tom, spent an hour with him, was amazed with the way that he discussed and spoke about meditation from the scientific point of view, from the spiritual point of view. And we got to the end of our hour together, and he said, "Look, Tim, you seem like a relatively intelligent kind of a bloke, and we could sit here and talk for hours, but he said, what'll make a difference is you coming and learning to meditate, if that's what you want to do." And I said, "Mate, sign me up." and I learned to meditate with him the next day.
Yep.
And it changed my life. And I immediately started to feel more relaxed, more at ease, more open. I felt my whole kind of biochemistry start to shift and change. And it made a huge difference.
So you felt this from the very near the
Day
first
one.
Day one.
Day one,
Okay.
I started to feel that shift.
Yeah.
And I studied with Tom, and then I went back into the corporate world for a while. Changed my careers. I moved out of agriculture, corporate agriculture, into brand strategy and development. Areas that I had no, background in, but I just felt, really solid inside of myself and happy to step into the unknown, and opportunities started, coming my way. And my sister and I brought Mikhail Gorbachev and General Norman Schwarzkopf out here in 1999.
Okay.
I chaperoned Mikhail Gorbachev and his wife Raisa around Sydney because I spoke Russian. I kind of got the opportunity to spend some time with them. And had a great couple of years back in the corporate world, but I just fell in love with this. And the only thing I was doing in my life different was I was meditating twice a day for 20 minutes. And I was just feeling more relaxed, more connected, more available, open. And people around me were saying, "Mate, what are you on?" And I was like, "I'm meditating."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Where do you get some of that?" And I was like, "Go and see this bloke." So there's a bit of a go track between me and Tom, and I started supporting him with his teaching and working in corporate Australia in the .com days in brand strategy, and eventually I just realised this is what I wanted to do, and so I approached Tom and said, "Would you train me to be a teacher?" And he said, "Well, I've taught 10,000 people to meditate, but I've never trained a teacher." But he said, "Your timing's immaculate. My father passed away in the States 2 weeks ago." And he said, "After 35 years here in Australia, I've got to go back to Flagstaff, Arizona." And I said, "Oh." And he said, "But if you want to learn, if you want me to train you, you can come to Flagstaff, Arizona. I'll train you and send you back as my successor here in Australia." I said, "Fantastic." So he left. I got a fax back in the old days. And he said, "If you're serious, get on a plane." I was not married, didn't have kids at the time, so I packed up, flew to Flagstaff, Arizona, moved into a house with Tom and his wife and his 4 kids under 6. And I studied in Flagstaff, Arizona, and studied for a year with him, right on the coalface of householder living. I wasn't sitting in a cave somewhere. I was changing nappies and studying, and we were hiking up through Sedona and Flagstaff. It was an amazing year. It was kind of, I call it my Mr. Miyagi year. I studied, trained, and came back and set up the centre with my then girlfriend that became my fiance, that became my wife,
Yep.
and mother of our 3 kids, Will, Gracie, and Rosie.
So that's one of the, misconceptions that a lot of people have that I've found about meditation in, Western society, is that they do think it's something people do in caves, but you said that you learnt from Tom, in a normal household, and isn't it, important in your view to make that aware to people that it's really something that, even though it hasn't been practiced in traditional Western society, that how important is it in your view to spread this technique of meditation, which we'll get into the specific technique in a minute, but just meditation in general? Why is it so important?
Yeah, I mean, this technique comes from what we call the Shankaracharya tradition in India. But this technique was cognized, practiced by people, what we call householders, people in the world engaged in life, not people up in caves, for about 2,500 years. And then 2,500 years ago, people worked out how to use boats. India, to that point, had been a continental island, so it had the Himalayas to the north, ocean on 3 sides, and so no one could get into India for over 2,500, or for many thousands of years, which is why it developed as a very sophisticated nation very early in human history. Then 2,500 years ago, people worked out how to use boats, and the armadas started arriving on the shores of India. And it was at that time that a particular teacher saw that this knowledge that was being practiced by people in India, was there on a daily basis, was going to get wiped out by these marauding, these people that were kind of coming into India. And so they then sent a group of people up into the Himalayas, or the Himalayas as they're referred to act as the backup disc for the knowledge.
So what year roughly are we talking about now?
I couldn't be specific, but it was about 2,500 years ago.
I'm glad that you've mentioned this, Tim, because there's, just looking up, if you look up transcendental meditation on the internet, there seems to be 2 different views, whereas Mararishi Mahesh Yogi is attributed to developing transcendental meditation, but then you read other parts where it says, oh no, this goes back thousands of years.
Yeah, that's right. And so the techniques and the history and the lineage is over 2,500 years.
Okay.
And so this teacher took it up into the mountains for 2,500 years. There was a lineage through which that came, but they kept what we call the householder technique. So there was the reclusive monastic techniques that were practiced by those in the mountains, and then these householder techniques that were kept alive in the tradition until India was ready for them again. 1947, Lord Mountbatten declares independence return to India, and as a result of that, the head of this tradition, a guy called Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, came forward and made a declaration that as a gift for the sovereignty of India returned after 2,500 years of being occupied, that this knowledge would be given back to the people again.
Sure.
So we look back and we see people sitting up in the mountains meditating, and people think, oh, that's what meditation's about. This was just a very temporary measure. While India, got ready to be available for this again. And, the principles of this technique have been alive for all of that time. Maharishi himself was from the Kshatriya class system of India, the warrior class. His teacher, Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, in the saffron robe, was from the Brahmachari. But Maharishi became very close. It's a long story, but became very close with his teacher. But when he passed away, he wasn't in the kind of direct lineage, but through inspiration, he ended up finding himself coming to the world and being drawn on, because he spoke English beautifully. He started teaching in English, and then people and travelers in India came across this guy that articulated himself beautifully, had this understanding and knowledge from his teacher, and then as a result of that, he really kind of started and was invited to the West to teach because he spoke English. And then that's how the Beatles learned to meditate with him, and then the whole thing kind of took off.
And he taught Tom Knowles, who taught you.
That's right. So when Maharishi first came to the world and started teaching, he called it DM, We, you
Okay.
call it deep meditation.
All right.
And then they changed the name to TM, Transcendental Meditation. Tom was trained and taught by Maharishi himself. Was very close to Maharishi for many years. But then, as with all things, there are parting of ways. It happens all the time in relationships. And Tom and the TM organisation went different ways. And the TM organisation's done some wonderful work in the world. And now we teach what we refer to as Vedic meditation, which is this technique that's been taught for over 5,000 years. And it's come through this unbroken lineage. We call it Vedic meditation these days. So Veda means knowledge. It's an ancient body of knowledge.
Isn't the Vedas, don't they refer to ancient scripts or texts?
They do, yeah. The Vedas actually are, a complete set of cognitions about the mechanics of everything. That's probably the easiest way I can explain them.
And is the technique actually in the Vedas?
Yeah, the technique is inside of. In fact, there's a very important story in the Vedas called the Bhagavad Gita, and it's about a warrior on a battlefield that finds himself in an incredibly horrible conundrum of about to have to engage in hand-to-hand combat with people that he cared about. And he finds himself catatonic on a battlefield, and his teacher right there on the battlefield instructs him how to transcend. So this idea of transcending and learning how to transcend, the value of that which is moving beyond, the minutiae of the mind and emotion, and getting what I call getting back a few rows in the conscious cinema is what I talk about. Allows someone to consciously engage differently with themselves and therefore everything else. That technique was, taught by Krishna to Arjuna on the battlefield over 5,000 years ago, and it was, available before then. So this idea of transcending, Maharishi then kind of formalized that teaching, brought it to the West.
Yep.
That's what people refer to as TM, but the technique is ancient. And so now we teach under the banner of Vedic meditation, and it's a transcending technique. It allows the mind to settle, the body to relax deeply, turns off adrenals, turns on serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, gives deep rest to the mind and body, allows the mind and body to process, de-stress, which then allows people to think more clearly, more creatively, more energetically. It's a pretty simple thing, actually.
And isn't it ultimately it's a process of what they call self-realization? And can we talk about that for a minute, Tim? Because I want to bring the conversation back to the context of how I came to you, which was because in recovery, in 12-step fellowships, they talk about prayer and meditation as a huge part. You really, if you are addicted and you're powerless over that addiction, then you have to have what they call some type of spiritual experience. So gradually that's what's got me really interested in spirituality and meditation. But when they talk about meditation in the 12 steps, it was written in the 1930s in America, and it was more of a contemplation type of meditation.
Contemplative-based practice rather than a
And I don't think they had self-realization in their mind, but these days now I think it's the meditation you're talking about has become the dominant form. Yeah,
and again, they're kind of big titles, aren't they? Self-realization, enlightenment, what are those things? And spirituality, what is that? I think it's all those things require definition, otherwise they sound very esoteric. And I think transcending is moving beyond the constraints of the mind, the body, the emotional. It's about moving into those more unbounded aspects of ourselves. So this physical body is the retail end of self. You can see it, you can touch it, you can poke it, you can, but we know then there's a mind in behind that. You can't see or touch that, but it's there. We know emotions are there, can't see and touch. And the way I think about it's a bit like those Russian dolls. Those Russian dolls? They've got layers to them. Yeah. The Vedic worldview is that we have what we call Maya Kosha, which are these sheaths, the physical sheath, the mental sheath, the emotional sheath, all these layers to us. But when consciousness becomes very constricted, we become very identified with the physicality, very enmeshed in our individuality. And I talk about being, stuck in the front row of the conscious cinema.
Yeah.
It's a bit like you go to the movies, you get stuck in the front row, your nose on the screen, you can't see, it's all overwhelming, you can't see the screen. It can be a fantastic film, but if you're in the front row, it's a horrible experience. And the solution is not to leave the cinema. The solution is to work out how to get back a few rows in the cinema. And if we can get back a few rows in the cinema, then the screen drops back, the sound settles, choc top in one hand, someone you like next to you, or popcorn if that's your thing. And you can really lend yourself to the experience without being overwhelmed by it. And that makes all the difference. And when you take all the fluff and nonsense out of it, spirituality is about exploring and not conceptually or philosophically, but experiencing those quieter, stiller, more unbounded aspects of ourselves. And we're not trying to get rid of the body and the mind, we're just looking to add on to that experience, those quieter, stiller, more unbounded aspects. And that's what self-realization is. We're becoming aware of what our capital S self is stillness right through to dynamics. That inner quiet, still unboundedness inside the dynamics of thought, speech, emotion, action, engagement. And self-realization is about being able to be aware of all of those aspects at the same time. So it's not about getting rid of anything, it's about adding on to that experience.
Sure.
And that's what spirituality is. Spirit is essence. Essence is the least expressed version of something. And that's what we're looking to do, is to experientially turn our awareness around. When we're externally orientated, the senses draw us into the outside world. We want to learn how to turn our awareness around and become aware of those more unbounded aspects. That's what transcending, that's what meditation and a transcending technique does. It takes us in that direction, experientially, not conceptually or philosophically.
Because it sounds crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it sounded crazy to me when I first heard about it. Essentially, we are not who we think we are.
Yeah.
So we're not, I'm not Bertie with the with this body and the mind, and who I am on a more fundamental level is spirit or soul. I suppose, is that something along the lines?
You're not only that.
Okay.
And I think that's the thing.
Right.
You're not only that. You are that.
Yeah.
You're that, and you're also all these other. There's all these other layers to oneself. But if we haven't got access or experience to that, then that's not our reality. And our identity is, I am this mind in this body in this outside world. That's our reality. It's no different from me looking in this direction and my reality is in this direction. But there's all of this behind me. And if I'm only faced in this direction, I don't turn around and become aware of what's behind me, then I've only got 50% of the information available to me. If I turn around and have a look behind me, I bring all of that into my awareness as well. And then I might turn back in this direction, and I've got an awareness of that. I know what's behind me. It's a reality. It's not a conceptual thing. It's a reality to me. And then I turn back in this direction towards you. And I still have an awareness of what's behind me. And we're looking to add this, this onto that. Right. Because if I do that, I've got a whole experience, a reality. I'm aware of the reality around me. It's a full and complete reality. If we're only externally orientated, which is what humanity's been doing for a couple of thousand years, just so enmeshed in this relative outside world, there's something missing, and there's that sense of missing something. We don't feel fulfilled. We don't feel complete. There's that desire to feel complete and fulfilled. And if we don't know how to turn our awareness around and bring that into our awareness, then what we tend to do is go into the outside world and see if we can fulfill that through relative acquisition. Can I acquire my way to feeling fulfilled, complete, secure, stable, all of those things? And that's what people do. If I can, earn lots and lots of money, and if I can get all these things, and the house and the car and the wife and or the husband or the this and the that, and or acquire status, and then I'll feel complete, full, stable and secure. And that, we've run that model. It doesn't work. And it's not, we don't want to get rid of all of this. This is wonderful. It's not about getting rid of it. It's just about adding this onto it. And when we turn our awareness around and access that quiet, still, unbounded, stable aspect of our conscious state and turn it around into this ever-changing aspect, we're able to enjoy inner stability, inner stillness inside of dynamics. And that is a state at which the mind and body can be peaceful and at ease. And not only that, more importantly, ready to be of service to the world. That's what the whole of life's about, being of service. But if we haven't got an inner stability, an inner point of reference, and our our experience is only this ever-changing mind and the ever-changing body and the ever-changing outside world, we don't feel stable, we don't feel secure, and our ability to therefore be of service to the world is heavily compromised. Plus that feels incredibly uncomfortable, and we want to be away from it. And that will drive us into fight or flight.
Right.
Then we start producing adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, coagulants. We turn off the serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin. Therefore we feel constricted. And there's that feeling of feeling, constricted, fearful, all of those things. What do we want to do? We want to feel relaxed and connected. And us humans have worked out that certain things will give us that experience. Alcohol.
Like drugs.
Recreational drugs.
Alcohol,
but there's all kinds of things.
Sure.
It can be, people can have exercise. I've spent plenty of time with exercise addicts. It's no different from alcohol or drugs. It's no different. They do that thing. They've got a relationship with something outside of them that is not a constructive one. And what I love about the Vedic worldview is that it says you can have a constructive relationship with anything. You can have a destructive relationship with anything. It's got nothing to do with the thing. It's got to do with the state of consciousness interacting with it. And if we can shift and adjust the conscious state that we have, then that allows us to shift and change the relationship we have with everything. These things, we can have a constructive relationship with these things, or a destructive one. Society likes pointing the finger at these things and saying, oh, they're dreadful and they're this, and social media is this and that. It's an abdication of personal responsibility. Someone can have a very constructive relationship with social media. We've just seen, Grace Brennan with Buy from the Bush do something extraordinary. She gave the Australia Day address the other day, and she showed that social media connected people. It's brought an enormous impact to the bush, and to women in the bush especially, but families. An extraordinarily wonderful thing. Or you can have a destructive relationship where you can be addicted to it. It's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with us. And we need to shift this. And if we can shift our internal conscious experience, get our brain and body flooding with serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin daily. Not when you get away for a holiday once every 6 months or something. Every day, hit the pressure valve, release the stress and tension, shift our biochemical cocktail. Then our relationship with all these other things changes.
Is it possible though for the average Joe, to achieve
Poor old Joe.
to achieve this connection with the universe, or with the source of the words I'm lacking to describe what you just described, but see, for me as an addict, the first thing I learnt was the cause of the addiction was exactly what you said. I was yearning for connection with something.
Yep.
I didn't even know why I was addicted. I knew for many years that I was addicted, and probably abusing alcohol as well. But coming into sobriety has been the most difficult time, because I'm really struggling to find answers, and I found it's just as easy to be discontent not using drugs or drinking and living in sobriety as it was in my addiction days. So, and so that's why the meditation, specifically the TM that you've been, the Vedic meditation,
Vedic meditation,
VM, has been helpful to me. But I want to ask you your experience personally. So how many years have you been doing this?
I've been meditating for 22 years this year.
And have you, what levels have you, had transcendence? Have you? I'm really interested to know your experience, Tim, and
there's a little bit of a thing in this tradition that, sharing our experiences is that what we're more interested in is showing people how they can have their own personal, experience. That's the really important thing. But there's no doubt that what meditation does for me, being a person in my own right. A husband, a father to 3, a meditation teacher, involved with the Bronte Surf Club, a brother, a son, we've all got 1,000 hats, everyone does, is that inside of the dynamics, and by the way, we are living in a world where the dynamics and stimulation have just escalated in such a short period of time. I was watching a TED talk the other day. It was one of the world's leading neuroscientists, and he was saying someone living in a city anywhere in the world in 2000 20, is being exposed to the same levels of stimulation in one day that someone 250 years ago, which in the scheme of conscious human nervous system and conscious development is just a blink of an eye, would have been exposed to in their whole lifetime. And he graphed it. He showed, people have been walking at 4 or 5 kilometres an hour, running at 10, 12 kilometres an hour for short bursts for 249,750 years, which is about the period of time that the human, current human structure's been around. It's only the last 250 years that we've had steam, electricity, cars and trains. Plane travel only really became available in the mid-1960s. I taught a Qantas pilot the other day. He was telling me it's only like mid-1960s that plane travel was available for general consumption.
And so what's this exposure to all the stimulation doing to us as a race? I mean, are we going crazy?
Well, then we went into personal computers in the mid-90s, then we went mobile phones in the noughties, and then, now we've gone with these supercomputers, that we're walking around. But, that comes back to the third law of thermodynamics, which says as you excite or stimulate any system, it will naturally move towards a state of disorder and chaos. As you de-excite a system, it will naturally move towards a state of order. So, asking the question, why has meditation and these things kicked off like they have in the last, little while? When I first started teaching 19 years ago, I'd go to a birthday party or a dinner party. Someone would say to me, what do you do? And I say, I teach meditation. They pick up their drink and walk up the other end of the bar.
Okay.
These days I can't go anywhere, before someone asks me and I'm handing out cards or giving an introductory talk or, the apps that have just flooded the market, and they're fantastic, by the way. Headspace, Insight Timer, Smiling Minds, these are fantastic. It's giving people an opportunity to embrace meditation at arm's length, and giving people an opportunity all of this is coming to the mainstream. It's very exciting. But the question is why? Why has this become such a big thing? And the answer is because the stimulation levels are off the hook. It's creating disorder, mentally, physically, and emotionally in the individual, which then presents in the family unit, the societal unit, country unit, world unit, and I personally believe in the environmental unit.
The connection, that's what I was just about to ask you, because if we are pure consciousness, if that's all that we are, and we are connected to the external environment, is the external environment a reflection on what's happening to us internally? Because, as you've seen, and we just talked about it before we started filming, it would appear that, on an external, in the environmental level, things are not so good. 2020, we've just had massive bushfires on an unprecedented level here in Australia. So what's the connection? Is that what, they say?
The word that I would use, there's, in all things, there's amplification. What we're seeing is amplification in everything. And that's coming from overstimulation. Again, from the individual right through to the environmental, we're seeing amplification in everything. Everything's getting amplified. And so it's very simple. What's the counter to that? Science says whatever one thing is, then the opposite is also true. So, what do we need to do? We're seeing the amplification that's causing things to move into disorderly presentation. What's the solution to that? The answer is de-excitation. And that's exactly what meditation does. It de-excites the individual conscious state. And then we come back to that idea, which is, well, if everything's connected, then if we're individually de-exciting, that impacts everything. If we're individually exciting and moving towards disorder, so the qualities of an orderly conscious state, as declared by neuroscience, are clarity, creativity, energy, joyfulness, intelligence, and prints out as physical well-being. That's an orderly conscious state. Disorder starts to come into a conscious state. We start to lose clarity. The conscious fog sets in. Lose creativity, lose energy, lose joyfulness, lose intelligence. There's a movement towards a lack of ease, lack of mental, physical and emotional ease, and if that is unchecked and unaddressed, we'll move into dis-ease. That applies to everything. Unified field theorem, which is one of my favorite topics, states simply that there is one whole, indivisible, conscious field expressing itself in infinite diversity while maintaining its unified nature at all times. The statement of unified field theorem is there is only one thing. That's where unified field unified field theorem, and quantum mechanics is going. It's what spirituality has been talking about forever.
Yeah.
It said there's one thing. It's what we see in technology. The trending is the movement from that which we once thought was separate, other and different.
Yeah.
We're starting to realize is actually very close, connected and similar. The trend is the realization of the interconnectedness of everything.
Yeah.
That's the theme of this age.
And that's where fear arises, isn't it, in the individual who thinks they are disconnected from everything else.
Yeah.
But is it possible? Do you see it happening?
Yeah.
Because it seems, in today's world, the politics particularly, in Australia and the United States and elsewhere is really divisive.
Divisive, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, I also think that we've abdicated our personal responsibilities. We want someone else to fix it. We've run the model of waiting for someone else to sign a piece of paper and, that's going to fix it. We've run that model. It doesn't work. What's going to change things is individuals shifting their own conscious states. And that might seem like a small action, but back to that point, if everything's interconnected, then if we shift our conscious state, it impacts everything. And it's no different. If I take the pinky finger on my right hand and I pull it, what happens is the whole body comes with it. So while we might think of ourselves as small as an individual and potentially insignificant, while we might be small and individual, what we've got to realize is that we're connected and everything is connected to everything else. So through impacting our own individuality, we impact everything else. And that's where, the thinking, I think, has to change. Let's stop waiting for someone else to sign a piece of paper over there that's going to fix it. The individual shifting and influencing their own conscious state, opening that conscious state up to its full reality and potential, that's what's going to change the world. And you know what? This is imminently doable. It's imminently doable. This can actually be done.
Yep.
And that, I think, is what we're seeing. We're seeing this explosion in interest in meditation. We're starting to see people. I get kids walking through the door now, and I mention meditation, and they go, yeah, I do that at school with my teacher. In such a short period of time, we're going to see meditation in our lifetime is going to become about as exotic as brushing your teeth. I call meditation mental and emotional hygiene. It's no different. We wash the body, we brush the teeth, and we need to flush ourselves mentally and emotionally every single day. Not once a week, not twice a year or something. Every single day you've got to do that, and especially in the dynamics that we're operating in.
So teaching children to meditate is really important. How old can they be before they start to learn to meditate?
I teach a lot of kids to meditate. I taught my 3 kids to meditate at 4 years of age. They're up and running.
Okay.
They don't do 20 minutes. They don't even have to sit down. They can actually do what we call their little word of wisdom while they're walking around. It's amazing.
Okay.
But 5 years of age, kids can learn, and it's phenomenal. The great thing is they haven't built up all these layers of stress and tension that us adults have got to kind of move through.
Yeah.
They just pop back. But once they know how to get back there, they can get back there very, very quickly. And I teach a lot of kids that have been diagnosed as, ADD, ADHD, disorderly behaviour things, these kinds of diagnoses, and with other disciplines and various things, but we're supported by those. But when the child knows how to do that themselves, and we've all heard that story. Oh, Johnny, he's actually a really nice little kid, but he's just out of control, And when that child knows that they're going to get in trouble when they're starting to move down that path, if you can show them how to turn themselves around, they'll do it, because they don't like getting in trouble. They don't like being the bad kid. And it's amazing working with kids. They just get it so quickly.
And because there's so many different techniques of meditation out there, do you think Vedic meditation is the best one or easiest one for a child to learn?
I think they're all great. I think, but what I love about Vedic meditation is that you can do it anywhere: bus, train, plane, car. You don't have to sit in funny pretzel positions. You don't have to stare at candles. If you can sit, and close your eyes, you're good to go. Okay. And people do that. I do a lot of corporate work these days. I worked with the Wallabies last year. Didn't quite get the result we were after there, but let's not talk about that. But if someone can sit, close their eyes and practice this very simple little technique. We use a mantra. A mantra is a manas, mind, vehicle, a mind vehicle, and it's a very simple little sound with no meaning, but it engages the mind and it triggers a response that takes the mind into those deeper states. And as the mind goes in, the body relaxes, the body will follow, and it triggers this whole sequence of events. So when the mind's bouncing around here on the surface, it's what I call conscious snorkeling. We're doing this all the time, bouncing around here. When we learn to meditate properly, we learn how to what I call conscious scuba dive, which is get the mind to move through that vertical plane. That's where all the benefits of meditation come. That's what Vedic meditation does beautifully. It's so ridiculously simple. And when I teach people to meditate, I talk about learning to ride the meditation bike. So when we're all learning to ride a bike, there were 3 important things. You get fitted for the right size bike, that helped enormously. If someone was willing to hold the back of the bike while you got your balance, and gave you some half-decent instructions, pretty much. It was a bit of a wobble and we all took off a bit of skin, but soon enough we're riding a bike. And meditation is exactly the same. Correct mantra, passed on correctly, with correct instruction, not complicated.
Because for me, I don't know 100% of the time whether it's working or not. So how do you know that it's working for you when you're doing it?
Yeah, and the answer to that is that there's a whole lot of things that happen in meditation. One is de-stressing, processing stress, tension, fatigue. Going deep, there's a whole lot of things, and that's why we need to be instructed correctly to understand that. But when someone truly understands meditation, they sit, they practice simply, as a maximum for adults, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon. And it's not about what happens in the 20 minutes that we're that interested in. It's about how we feel for the 5, 6, 7, 8 hours after meditation. So to answer your question, you know that meditation is working when you start to find yourself in the world in situations maybe in the past that might have overwhelmed you or consumed you or created anxiety, and you start to find you're not having that experience anymore. That's when you know that meditation, no matter what happened in that, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, sometimes a bit of a mixed bag in there, it's not about the 20 minutes, it's all about how we feel afterwards.
You can sort of sense though, can't you, when you are deep? Because I sort of have this feeling, I wouldn't describe it as a heavy feeling, but I can definitely feel something in my body, and I'm aware of it when I try and come out too soon, that I'm in some type of different state.
That's it, and that's when you practice the technique, and it literally shifts your biochemical cocktail. You start flooding with serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and that feeling kind of completely relaxed and connected and kind of amorphous, and it's that lovely, relaxed, deep feeling, and that's a good experience. Sometimes, and my meditation is still 22 years in, sometimes I have very thought-filled meditations. But I know that that's the body processing. It's not my mind, it's not my naughty, mischievous monkey mind, which is a phrase that I would happily remove from the English language if I had the chance. It's not your mind, it's your body releasing stress and tension to get that out of the way, to be able to access more of that quiet, clear, creative, energetic state for the 5, 6, 7 hours after meditation. And once we understand that, then we happily go with that process. One of my favourite little sayings, and I've adjusted a bit over the years, forgive me for that, but it goes along the lines of the greatest joys in life are not necessarily experiencing new people, places, things and events, but familiar people, places and things and events through new eyes. That's where the joy in life lies. It's the house we wake up in, with the friends that we had, the family we have, the work we do. It's about seeing that through new eyes, not because it's necessarily changed, but because we have. That's where life gets really interesting. Otherwise, we want to be somewhere else, doing something else, with somebody else, and we're not able to really enjoy. There's a lot of talk about being in the present, being in the now, being mindful. They are not things that you practice to become. They are a byproduct of correct meditation practice. You can't force the mind into sustainably having that access to those things. But we meditate correctly, process and de-stress, de-excite the mind, and the mind starts to sit in the present, in the now. We are able to be mindful. They are a byproduct of practice. They are not practice.
Tim, I could go on talking to you forever and ever, because I'm absolutely fascinated with this, from somebody who went to a Catholic school and then really just exactly right. I didn't want anything to do with it, spirituality or any of that stuff, but I've totally done a 180 now, and seeing things in a new light. So
Yes.
I've got two more questions
Good.
for you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I brought this book along because
great. Yep, Osho,
has really given me a headache.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
He says here, and I know that part of his whole game was a shit stirrer, basically,
yeah.
but here he goes. He's talking about the United States.
Yep.
And he says, in the mental asylum, those people who have devised their own mantras in actions, in words, are just consoling themselves.
Yeah.
This is the whole secret of transcendental meditation and its success in America. America is today a great mental asylum. It needs something to repeat monotonously, continuously.
Yeah.
It helps people, just the same gesture, the same posture, the same mantra.
Yeah.
Transcendental meditation is not meditation, and it is not transcendental either. What would you have to say to that?
It's I love this, and I think Maharishi used to do this as well. They used to stir each other up, and I think again, there's a few things there that I don't agree with directly. And again, with our mantra, we're not practicing mantra meditation. We're not sitting there banging away on something. A mantra is a manas mantra vehicle. It's a mind vehicle. So that's why we need to approach it correctly. And we're not repeating that thing all the time. We're coming to it gently, just like you would get in a car. You would go somewhere, then you would step out of the car, and then you'd step back into the car and you go to the next destination, and then you'd step out of the car. The mantra is not the goal, it's the vehicle that takes the mind into that state. And so there's enormous amounts of confusion. I think Osho himself didn't actually really understand the practice, obviously. But he had many great things to say. So I think the answer to that is that, for me and what I've seen over my experience, I've taught over 5,500 people to meditate now over the last 20 years, is, showing how to hit the pressure valve, shift their biochemical cocktail, relax the mind, relax the body, get back a few rows in the conscious cinema, allows them to relate to themselves more artfully. And we've all got those little neuroreceptor sites in our brain that are seeking serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin. If we're locked in the flight-fight response and not producing that, those little receptor sites will be screaming out for that, for those good biochemicals. And if we don't deliver those biochemicals endogenously by our own biochemical factory, we will go to the outside world and find something that will give us a short-term simulated experience. That's where addiction comes from.
Yes, absolutely.
And we're seeing that. And I think we all have addiction. I think everyone does.
Yep.
It's just to the degree, of course. But what it is neediness. Addiction is I need something outside of me to give me an experience. The reason that all those outside products work is we are designed to produce that natural biochemistry endogenously. And if we can get our brain and body relaxing deeply, processing, coming out of the flight-fight response into what we call the stay and play response, or the rest and digest is the other term that's given to it, then we produce that natural biochemistry. All those little sites get activated, and our need for that outside thing, the relationship with that starts to change. Over time, it's not the silver bullet and in conjunction with other things. But if we're adjusting our own biochemistry like that, then those sites are getting activated, and the neediness we have for something outside of us and the relationship with that can change. And that's where, someone, and why meditation, and, I teach Vedic meditation. I know for sure that is effective. It's an effective component in people with addictive relationships with things. It can be a wonderful piece in the puzzle. There's no silver bullet, that, but it can be a very important part for a part of the process for people to shift their own conscious state. Because unless someone's doing that, they may apply abstinence, they apply their will, to abstain, but if they haven't got that natural biochemistry going through their brain and body, and then added demands and various things, pressures come, that feeling that desire to want to feel connected, relaxed, unbounded again will come.
For an addict, and this is a big part in the 12-step fellowship, or 12-step program, is that your will is hopeless. As far as your will is concerned, as being able to stop the addict, it's hopeless. So therefore, they say you need to turn your will and your life over to the care of a higher power. God. And this is what I wanted to ask you, because this had been a question that I had for you, is because what you've been talking about and what I find in the Eastern religions is that to find this power or source is you turn inwards. And we're encouraged in 12-step fellowships to look upwards or outwards.
Yes, yeah.
So how do you reconcile those two
It's so interesting,
things?
isn't it? You know, I mean, I think they're actually talking about the same thing. I think it's, you know, I think they're talking about the same thing. But I think if you look at, you know, if you read history and you look at all the great cultures over time and the great civilizations, you'll see that there are always great teachers and there's always great knowledge. And my research shows, it's common research, is that, you know, all the great teachers over time have always said exactly the same thing. I'm here to remind you it's inside of you. You know, you're looking out here for it everywhere. I'm here to remind you it's inside of you. One way or the other, in some way or form, that's the message that ends up getting told. And I think we've been so externally orientated for a couple of thousand years. And we've been so out here, and again, we don't want to get rid of this. This is a wonderful place. But we want to add on to that experience and that inner, still, unbounded aspect of ourselves. And if we don't have access to that, you know, we're enmeshed in this world, it's always changing. There's a fundamental human desire to experience stability, security, and non-change. That is something that we all need in our lives. And as you well know, mate, that does not exist anywhere out here.
No.
Physics tells us this is the realm of relativity and change. So if we're seeking stability, security, and non-change in our life out here, we're looking in the wrong place. It's not out here. It's in the least excited state of our awareness. And, you know, we need to take the mind this way. Every one of these trees that are sitting, you know, around us here, every one of these plants knows their fundamental premise is to go for sunshine. That's what they're seeking sunlight. And yet every one of them knows it has to invest time, effort, and energy going this way in order to successfully and sustainably go this way. And you look at that tree, you can't see the root structure, it's not there. Well, it's not, we can't see it, it's not evident, it's transcendental. It's below the level here. But this tree knows it spends time and effort and energy every day doing that so it can sustainably and successfully do this.
And it happens spontaneously without any effort. It doesn't have to think about it. Is that what the curse of modern man is? I
think, you know, the wonderful choice. You know, this is one of the amazing things about the human conscious state is we are given the opportunity to choose, and I think that's amazing, but that has led us away from, you know, realizing the value of this work. And it's not evident. It's not, the root structure here is not evident. But if this tree today just said, I'm not doing that anymore, I'm just going to go for it, it'll look fantastic, it'll grow, it'll be a great big tree and all that. Bit of a storm comes, that whole thing's going to end up here in the pond. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people getting overwhelmed, consumed, because they haven't got a conscious foundation that can operate inside of the dynamics. We're seeing, and I've seen, you know, so much of this over the last number of years. Anxiety, depression, you know, lack of ease into dis-ease is just escalating, of which addiction is one of those things. And, you know, the solution to that, you know, as advocated in the STEPS program, is spirituality. So what is spirituality? Opening up our conscious state to that broader, more unbounded aspect of ourselves. And one of the things I say to people when I teach them to meditate, I encourage them to delegate. So the best meditator is the best delegator. And the answer is to what? And I say, well, have a look at your fingernails, and what you'll see is that they've grown since you last cut them. Did you put any intellectual effort into growing those fingernails? They generally, most of the time, they say no, thank goodness. My response, if they say yes, is I say to them, you and I need to have a very, very serious conversation if you're thinking about your fingernails.
Okay.
But I'll say, you know, what I want you to do for the next 20 minutes is delegate to that intelligence that turned your eggs and avocado, you know, that you had for breakfast 3 mornings ago into fingernails. That intelligence, we've got an intellectual intelligence, and there's another layer of intelligence here that, as you and I are sitting here now, is structuring and organising 6 trillion things per second. There is a whole body replacement program underway as you and I are sitting here now. And thank goodness we do not have to get up on Friday mornings and think, you know, grow eyebrows, you know, replace skin, create biochemicals, grow fingernails. That just gets done. But the hubris of the human intellect the arrogance of the human intellect that has developed over ages is we get so intellect-centric. Our whole education is intellect-centric. And the intellect's a wonderful thing, but it's only one aspect of ourselves. But that intellect gets in there and dominates things. That's where we can get into trouble. When we sit to meditate, I encourage people to check their fingernails and delegate to that intelligence that's structuring and organising 6 trillion things per second. So the best meditator is the best delegator. We sit, delegate. Here's your 20 minutes. I take the good old Aussie approach to meditation, which is we sit, check the fingernails, delegate, knock yourself out. Here's 20 minutes for that intelligence to do what it needs to do. And if we do our little bit and trigger it, the intelligence, the mind and body will do the rest for us.
And what about bigger things? Like for me, I have a lot of fear around my future because I just turned 40 the other day.
Congratulations. Just warming up, Bertie.
Yeah, well, I had a bit of a crash and burn 2.5 years ago, and now everything is flipped on its head. I don't want to pursue the career that I was in before. Yep. I don't know where my life is going or how I'm going to, provide an income for my son. Yes. And so I've got a lot of fear. And what you're saying, really, what I interpreted it as was to trust the source of.
Learn to trust. And that's one of the things we actually do in meditation is we learn to trust that intelligence, that it knows what it's doing. It is a fundamental premise. At some point in our lives, we get to a point where you've got to look around and you've got to make a decision about whether you believe whether there's intelligence in the universe or not. And then if you believe that there is intelligence, and I look at these trees, I look at you, I look at that camera, for me it's evident there's intelligence in play. Then you've got to make a decision about whether you're going to choose to trust that intelligence or doubt it. And if you go down that doubt model, then you're going to have to operate in a hyper-vigilant mode at all times. And that is the base of anxiety, stress and suffering. If you choose to trust that intelligence, and we choose to trust that intelligence, and it's not linear. The story of life is a very dynamic, non-linear thing. But if we choose to trust it, that's where the magic happens. And that's where we start engage willingly in the process. And we become a willing participant in the process rather than a reluctant, recalcitrant one. And Mother Nature says, come willingly or come in cuffs. How do you want to do this? And what we've got to do is get ourselves in a state where we can go with it rather than resist and resent. I love that film Groundhog Day. Oh yeah. And it's a great example of this. The Bill Murray guy gets caught in the, and he hates it and he's cranky and he's horrible to everyone. And you may remember, it's all about getting the girl in the end. It's about love, actually. And
to stop being such an asshole was a big part of it, wasn't it?
And the day's the same.
Yeah.
But what it doesn't change. What happens is he changes.
Yep.
And that goes from becoming a hellish experience for him to being an incredibly playful and heavenly one. Nothing outside of him changed. What he did was he shifted himself. And such an informative movie, that movie. It's a very, very clever movie. And this is what we've got to learn how to do is we don't have to change the outside world. We've got to shift ourselves first. And then this comes into play. Mahatma Gandhi's famous saying was, be the change you want to see in the world. We want to see change in the world. How do you make that happen? Shift this. Same as the Bill Murray, same as Groundhog Day. The analogy I use, it's a bit like you go to lunch, you end up with coriander in your teeth. If you stand there and try and fix it in the mirror over there, it will not do what it's told. You realise that that's this and you shift this. Look what just happened. That's the way the whole world works. And the sooner we understand this, the better. Because otherwise, people become finger pointers. It was him, it was her, it was, Tony or Scott or whatever his name is, whoever, we get into this finger pointing. It's so disheartening and disempowering. When we realise the world is to us as we are to the world is a self-referral phenomenon. Then we realise, and it's a little confronting in the beginning, but we realise what I've got to do is change this, I've got to shift this. And if I shift this and shift the relationship I've got with myself, it will change the way I relate to everything. Family, friends, careers, money, houses, cats, dogs and goldfish. Whatever it is that we're relating to, that relationship will change. And there's only one topic worth discussing in the whole universe, and that is relationships.
Yep.
The primary relationship we've got is with our own mind, body and essential nature. And if there's inner conflict in there, then that will present as conflict in every other relationship we have. If we're able to cultivate a more peaceful internal state, and we take that to the world, we invoke that in everything that we come across. And that's the way the world will change.
And meditation's the sure way to improve those relationships. But can I ask you, is there a place for prayer in Vedic tradition?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. And you know, the way that I talk about that with people that they've got a tradition or connected like that, or even, you know, aphorism, prayer, visualization, all those things, they're fantastic things. But if our mind's bouncing around here on the surface and there's all that internal conflict and we're trying to bring intention-based thinking to play, it's very ineffectual. But if we can quiet the mind, get the mind settling, body relaxing, get the mind to that quieter state, and then we bring intention to mind. Then we bring prayer, which is intention-based thinking. We bring visualization, we bring aphorism. You know, the power of that becomes so much exponentially greater. And it's like the gardener. The gardener prepares the soil, gets all the nutrients and the moisture in it first, and then they plant a seed. And the power of that is so much greater. You stick that seed in the top, you know, soil, you know, in dry soil, that thing's not going to do anything. But this is why I encourage people, they practice Vedic meditation, they get the mind into that quieter, still state, and then they do that work afterwards. And that's a really powerful combination.
Yep.
Yeah.
Tim, thanks, mate.
We could talk for days.
Good on you. Thanks so much.
Real pleasure, Bertie. And mate, you know, I remember you a year ago, and you've come so far, and I'm so excited for you. This is a great initiative.
Thank you.
You know, sharing your experiences with other people is fantastic, and you know, if I can be of a support in any way, let me know.
Yep, legend. Thanks, Tim.
My pleasure.
Cheers.
Very good.